Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi to my first impressions on Escoffier and Aoife, which are the characters that are supposedly going to be coming next patch. So, Escoffier is a 5-star Fontaine Cryo Polearm. Aoife is a 4-star Natlon Animo Catalyst. First thing you might notice if you look at Aoife's base stats is that his base attack is really low and his Ascension stat is Elemental Mastery. An Animo Catalyst with an Elemental Mastery Ascension stat, you might be thinking, oh, are we getting our 6th version of a bad Sucrose? And the answer to that is yes, that is what we're getting. So let's quickly go through what Aoife does. His normal attacks don't really matter too much, but the fact that they're Animo is nice, I guess, right? Because he's Catalyst, so he can prog VV or whatever just from normal attacks. A lot of the text on his kit is Omega scuffed right now, but basically, when he goes into his skill, he starts flying, has pretty much these very similar mechanics to Chaska when it comes to the movement options, but instead of having some cool interactions with bullets and shit, he just hits the enemy with Animo. It seems to not be that fast and not be that strong. However, he heals on hit. The problem is his healing numbers seem to be pretty damn low. The best comparison for an on-fielder Animo Catalyst with some healing is obviously going to be Yume Mizuki. Just in terms of numbers, he heals less than she does. However, Mizuki's healing is something that only happens when you're below 70%, and it only happens for the active character. What that means is that you don't actually heal that much. You're really capped in the amount of healing you can get. With Aoife, his healing happens no matter what, and it's healing for the whole team. The thing is, the numbers on that healing are really, really low. At talent level 9, it's 34.3% of his EM plus 97.9. You generally reach a little bit over 1000 EM on a character like this, so this is pretty much going to heal for about 500. A little bit more if you're using Farina and you get that healing bonus, maybe like 600. And from what I've seen, it seems like it's about once a second. So it's not that fast, but it's not like eons on slow. Anyways, about 600. But at least it's to your whole team. A little bit higher, goes to like 800-ish with the Farina healing bonus if you get constellations on him, but it's pretty damn slow healing. This amount of healing is generally going to be enough to break even for Farina's self-HP consumption on characters that don't have a lot of HP. Because Farina's HP consumption is a percentage of the character's HP, which means that effectively you need more healing on characters that have higher HP in order to break even with Farina's HP consumption. But characters that don't build HP, like attack scalers, obviously they consume less because they have less total HP, so it's easier to break even with your healing. And it seems like Aoife's healing is good enough to more or less break even on attack and defense scalers, but not on HP scalers. His burst is basically Hazel's burst. Seems like it does a little bit more damage than Hazel's burst, but that's pretty much it. He has an Ascension passive that gives him EM when your party triggers Night Soul Burst, so he basically just gets 80 EM from an Ascension passive. And the other one increases the swirl and electrocharge damage that your whole team is doing based on how much Night Soul your whole team has. It caps out at 180% if you have 120 Night Soul on your team. Now, because Auron obviously is a character that is supposed to work in electrocharge, and he gets a lot of Night Soul. Auron is a character who generally generates Night Soul faster than he consumes it in those teams, and so he should stay relatively, maybe not close to full, but relatively high Night Soul. And then Aoife's own Night Soul also counts towards this. If those are the only two Natlin characters, he won't have full uptime, or he won't get like the full buff, but he'll have pretty good uptime on a decent amount of it. His constellations also increase the amount that it's buffed. Keep in mind though, this is not actually multiplicative. This is a number that gets added to your EM multiplier. All right, if you're looking at a full EM character, I should have my Sucrose on a full EM build. 929 EM. Increases damage dealt by Swirl, among other things, but Swirl and Electrocharge by 500%. It just adds Aoife's passive to this number. So instead of 500, it would be pretty much 700. So instead of times 6, it would be times 8, which is like a 30% increase. It does not triple your Swirl damage, is the point I'm making. Unlike Yume Mizuki, he buffs Electrocharge as well as Swirl, which is a pretty big deal because you get a good amount of Electrocharge damage, arguably more than you get Swirl damage. His constellations, honestly, don't matter that much. His C1 is a bit of energy, who cares? His C2 effectively makes it so that this passive, right, at a baseline, each point of Night Soul is 1.5% more swirl and electro damage. No, it's 1.2%, sorry. It caps out at 150, which is 180%. His C2 increases the cap to 180 instead, which is gonna mean that your maximum increase is 36, so 216%, 36 more EM multiplier. But arguably more importantly, you cap it out with a lot less Night Soul in the team. Because he consumes his own Night Soul throughout his skill duration, without the C2, by the time you get to the end of your skill, he pretty much has no Night Soul anymore, so the only Night Soul you have is Aurorons. This makes it so that pretty much until the very end of your skill, you're still relatively close to your cap. C3 is skill talent levels, doesn't really matter that much. C4, it supposedly increases his grouping. I don't know how good his grouping is, but I'm not optimistic. But also he gains EM, which is nice. 100 EM is okay, but it's only after burst, which is a bit annoying. C5, burst talent, doesn't really matter. And C6, there's a 50% chance that his shots that he does during his skill to hit twice. The second one does a little bit more damage, but it doesn't really matter because you're building him on EM. I looked at whether his numbers would be could be good enough to justify using him as a carry on a non-EM build, and it does not seem to be the case so far. So it's mainly just an additional hit, which might help with your application. Not entirely sure what his ICD is like. If it does not help with application, I have no idea what the f it's supposed to do. So I'm gonna assume that it is supposed to help with application. All in all, this is an incredibly boring character that is pretty much doing the exact same thing as Mizuki. He's probably going to be a little bit better because he actually does normal attacks, right? While he's in his skill, he actually hits enemies with normal attacks, which means that he can proc Xingqiu, he can proc Official C6, he can proc Beidou. And also, his healing to the team is not reliant on triggering Furina's overheal passive, so he'll get much more fanfare average on Furina. So he's pretty much just going to be better than Yume Mizuki. Now, Mizuki's pretty bad, so him being better than her doesn't mean that much. I'm a little worried characters that have Night Soul mechanics like he does generally can't dash during their uptime, because if you dash, you lose like half your Night Soul points. So I feel like he might end up relying on resistance to interruption from either Xingqiu or Beidou to be able to do his job properly. Outside of that, because he's an Animo Catalyst, you can TTDS BB. He's also from Natlan, so you can also do Cinder City TTDS. But is that enough? It's not looking too hot. But yeah, all in all, pretty disappointing character. Not that much else to say about that. Now, let's talk about the real meat and potatoes of this patch, which is Escoffier. I feel torn about Escoffier. I like that they're actually giving Freeze more options with her, but her balance is not okay. Base HP relatively high, base defense relatively high, base attack pretty damn high, crit rate ascension. She is from Fontaine, which means no Cinder City, no Obsidian bullshit. But let's take a look at what she does. So normal attacks, normal stuff. She's not a normal attack focused character. We don't really need to care too much about this. Her Ascension 4 passive says, when the party has 1, 2, 3, 4 Hydro or Cryo characters on the party, Escoffier will decrease the Hydro resistance and Cryo resistance of any opponents hit by her skill or her burst by 5, 10, 15, 55% for 12 seconds. Her skill does all field damage, so this is basically 100% uptime on 55% shred if you're using only Hydro and Cryo character. This is fairly similar to what you see on Chillers, who has a similar passive with Electro and Pyro. But there's 3 key differences. 1, there's no rotational requirements, right? With Shovelers, there's no rotational requirements for the Shred, but there is a rotational requirement to get your attack buff. You need to trigger Overload before you hold her skill. 2, this still does something even if your party isn't full of Hydro and Cryo characters. And 3, this, assuming this is worded correctly, still activates even if all 4 party members are Cryo. Now, 55 is a very large number. Even if that was pretty much all she did, 55 shred is so much that it's arguably enough to justify a slot on the team. The thing is, that is far from all she does. But let's read the rest of her kit now. Skill. Escoffier will demonstrate different cooking techniques when you tap or hold this skill. The hold is a parametric transformer that gives you food. We only need to care about the top. Activates her all-spectrum multi-use cooking mech in its cold storage mode and deals AoE damage to nearby opponents. Cooking mech cold storage mode. Follows a current active character and fires frosty parfaits at nearby opponents at intervals, dealing cryo damage. It is an Uzia ability. Damage of the initial skill, 85%. The Uzia hit, 57. The damage over time hit is 204. But this hits once every second for 20 seconds. On top of that, skill cooldown is 15, not 20, which means you don't get forced into 20-second rotations if your teams can afford to do shorter rotations. This is premium off-field damage. You compare her to other off-fielders, and this amount of motion value is pretty much very similar to what they give. A good way to contextualize this, all right, let's take a look at how much Yai does. All right, talent level 3, 160. So it's more motion value than Yai. You don't have to do it 3 times. It lasts longer. Also, it applies cryo every other hit, so the ICD is better too. And Yai doesn't really do anything outside of her skill. This character shreds resistances by 55%. And we're not even done yet. Because now we can take a look at her burst. Scoring cuts, displaying her exceptional mastery over pyro and polearms. Sorry. Displaying her exceptional knife skills, Escoffier deals AoE cryo damage and restores HP to all nearby party members based on her attack. So she's got a team-wide heal that scales with the same stat as her damage does. And her first Ascension passive additionally gives healing over time to the active character. This character is a amalgamation of Chevreuse, Baiju, and Emilie, basically. She is continuing the power creep trend that's really solidified itself since the start of Natlan. The silver lining, if you care about balance, is that at least her damage on the skill is not AoE, it's single target. But yeah, this character is strong. In terms of damage, you can think of her as doing similar damage to Farina, with 55% shred and team-wide healing that enables Farina. In fact, her damage is good enough that even in teams where you don't get 4 stacks of this passive, she's still good. She is going to be a good teammate for Maoika teams that run double cryo, for reverse melt teams, but that's not where she's gonna truly shine. Where she will truly shine is, well, she's doing almost as much damage as cryo carries without needing any field time, and she's significantly buffing the damage of your cryo carries, and she fulfills the function of a healer in Farina teams. And she also increases the damage of her hydro carries. Basically, in a freeze team with like Ayaka, this is going to be a massive upgrade. With Risley, it'll also be an upgrade to his freeze teams, pretty significant one too. Ganyu's freeze teams are probably going to be better than our melt teams now, but those are probably not going to be the strongest Escoffier teams. Escoffier, I expect to be part of what I would consider the best team in the game, right? If you've followed this channel at all in the past few months, you'll know that despite Maoika dealing more damage than Neuvillette, I do still think Neuvillette is the best carry because of all of the quality of life upsides that his teams have. Well, Escoffier is going to be part of Neuvillette's best team. Neuvillette's best team, assuming Escoffier does not see any changes between now and her release, will be Neuvillette, Farina, Citlali, Escoffier. It'll be like 20% team DPS increase compared to his strongest teams now. But yeah, the main upsides is that just in terms of shred, you end up with a similar amount with Citlali plus Escoffier as you do with Xilonen plus Kazuha. In terms of damage percent, you get a little bit less, but you don't need to go refresh your buffs anymore because Escoffier's buff lasts long enough, and so does Citlali. Your healing is fully AoE, so you stack Fanfare faster, and Escoffier herself has a lot of damage. And so despite losing a stack, just from the fact that you gain Cryo Resonance, you gain Escoffier's damage, you have a little bit more Fanfare, then his personal damage will be a bit lower, but because you don't need to go refresh your buffs, your rotations will be faster. So his DPS is going to be very similar, but now, instead of your second and third unit in your team, or your third and fourth unit, right? Instead of it being like Kazuha Xilonen, which both pretty much don't really have any damage, you have Escoffier, which is doing as much damage as Farina. And also, Farina's damage actually goes up in those teams because, well, she's not losing a stack. So if Neuvillette's damage is pretty much the same, despite losing a stack, then Farina's damage is just going to be higher. But on top of all of that, you now don't have to deal with potential aura problems, right? Your shred happens no matter what against every enemy, even enemies that have innate pyro auras, whatever. And you have 100% freeze up time. Because Neuvillette teams weren't comfortable enough, honestly. I'm so glad, because Neuvillette's teams were just so weak and uncomfortable to play. So I'm really glad that we're finally getting a Neuvillette team that isn't complete garbage. Escoffier's main source of damage is her skill, so her best artifact set is going to be Golden Troop. There's going to be some teams where you can go for a supportive set instead, but generally, it's almost always Golden Troop. Her ER requirements, because she incentivizes playing multiple cryo characters, are generally not going to be that high. Her particle generation is 4 on skill from what I've heard. In teams where you go for units like this, you're generally either doing long rotations or using 3 cryo units. If you're doing like an Ayaka team, the premium Ayaka team is going to most likely be Ayaka, Shenhe, Escoffier, Farina. In a team like that, you get 2 Ayaka skills and 2 Shenhe skills per rotations. So you get a lot of cryo particle generation, so Escoffier's ER requirements are really low. If you're doing a Neuvillette team's rotations are generally going to be around 25-26 seconds with her. Plus, you get to battery Citlali's skill into her, so her ER requirements are really low as well. Another nice upside is that in Neuvillette teams right now, Citlali doesn't have a great weapon outside of Sig, because you don't have a good target for TDDS. But guess who's a good target for TDDS? That's right! Your attack scaling Cryo Shangling! That's also Cryo Shavars and Cryo Baiju! Is her damage really that high? We can take a look at a few different scenarios and see how much her skill is hitting for. For now, we'll take a look at Deathmatch on her. You might run into some issues with Deathmatch because crit rate ascension, cryo resonance in most of her teams makes it easy to overcap, but at least you don't, it's not like Molani where you're starting above 100 with Sack Jade, but you are still starting relatively high. Yeah, you're starting at like 75-ish%, but you can also use a bunch of other things. Jade Wing Spear is very similar to Deathmatch, but anyways, for now, let's just take a look at Deathmatch. First situation we're gonna look at is going to be on a Neuvillette team, right? So the Neuvillette, Citlali, Farina. Attack percent. In a team like this, you have Farina on Golden Troop because you're buffing Farina quite a bit, so you want to focus on her personal damage. You have Neuvillette on Maréchaussée. You have Citlali on Cinder City. So you don't have any attack percent from artifact sets. That being said, you will have TDDS on Citlali in this team. You go attack sense. One thing that we'll see going forward is that attack goblets are actually viable on her. Often as good, if not better, as damage goblets. And because she's a healer that scales on attack, if you have to choose between attack goblet and damage goblet and they're both about the same amount of damage, you'd rather have the one that heals more. So we're gonna look at attack goblet for now. Let's say you get about 20% attack from substats, 24% from the Deathmatch passive. Flat attack around 350 from Feather +2 flat attack substats. Damage percent in a team like this, you have Artifact Set, 70% from Golden Troop. You have Cinder City on Citlali. You have Farina. Your Fanfare average is going to be quite high in this team because her healing is AoE and you have Neuvillette. Deathmatch doesn't have any damage percent. Her own kit doesn't have any damage percent. I think that's it. Crit value, crit ascension, main stat, substats, cryo resonance, Deathmatch. Then we have resistance, resistance multiplier, and total damage. Resistance is shredded by her own passive, and so her skill is going to be hitting for about 24k on average. And this hits once per second. And that's with shred for the rest of your team and healing for Farina. Let's take a look at a few other scenarios. So scenario number 2 is going to be in a team where you're just using her as an off-field damage dealer, whatever. So Mawika, Bennett, Citlali. But even in a team like this, you're still hitting for 13k every second. That's without including the melted burst that you will be able to get. Oh yeah, I forgot power resonance. Oopsie. What about a third scenario? A scenario where she's triggering some reactions on her skill. So let's take a look at Kinich, Bennett, Mawika, I guess. In a team like this, the unmelted hits are going to be 10k. The melted hits are going to be 20k. So about 15k average. And finally, the sort of situation that will capitalize on her damage the most, which is going to be teams where instead of using Citlali, you're using Shenhe. You don't want to do that if you're doing hydro carries, but on cryo carries, it's definitely a consideration. So let's look at Ayaka, Shenhe, Farina, which means that an unbuffed skill hit will be about 25k. Or sorry, an unquilled skill hit. But when you have a quill, it'll be 40k instead. And you will be able to get a total of 10 quills out of 20 skill hits. So half of them are 25k, half of them are 40k. So it's going to be around like 33-ish k, 32, 33-ish k average hit every second. And that's without considering the fact that she's also significantly increasing your Ayaka's damage and your Farina's damage. If you've watched some of my content lately, you may have heard me talk about Xilonen potentially being the sort of units that doesn't see that much play long term because of the potential issue caused by Citlali. My reasoning for that was, and I suppose still is, Xilonen is a character who provides shred and a bit of a damage percent from the artifact set, but that's it. I guess also a bit of healing, sure. But the buff she provides is very generic, and it's good, but it's not insanely good. And it seems like all the dedicated supports they release for specific archetypes are being given broken numbers, which means that Xilonen looks like she will likely not be a part of any unit's best team 2 years from now. She's a sort of character that is quite versatile and that derives a lot of her strength from that. And because right now we don't have that many dedicated supports, we don't have dedicated supports for all the archetypes yet, and some of the dedicated supports we have are old and not Xilonen. Xilonen is still part of a lot of carries' best teams, but Escoffier is solidifying my opinion on Xilonen being the sort of unit that might not see too much play long-term in min-max teams. This character is like too strong. I hope she gets a bit of a nerf. She's a pretty major buff to Nevillette's teams. She's such a massive buff to Ayaka teams. She's also a pretty big buff to Risley teams, but she's a bigger buff to Ayaka than she is to Risley because Ayaka has much better synergy with Shenhe. And Shenhe being able to buff 2 units instead of 1 is a big deal. Each quill, like we just said earlier, is adding like almost 15k damage to Escoffier, right? That's 150k more damage from Escoffier being on the team versus if you were not using a third cryo in an Ayaka Shenhe team. The quills do a lot less if you're looking at like a cryo-infused Kazuha burst, for example, or if you're using a unit that doesn't use the quills at all, right? Because Shenhe gives the quills to each member of the party. So for dedicated Ayaka mains, this is a massive upgrade for your teams. If you don't have Shenhe, she's still an upgrade to your teams, but the fact that she has good synergy with Shenhe means that Shenhe is going to stay in the best Ayaka teams. Anyways, Escoffier's best set not being Blizzard's Prayer, although I guess Blizzard's Prayer will be good for her. It might actually be better in some scenarios, but her having access to a good set that isn't Blizzard's Prayer means that she doesn't get completely demolished by enemies not being freezable. An additional source of cryo application, even on non-freezable enemies, you'll have more cryo aura uptime for your cryo resonance, for your Blizzard's Prayer on your cryo carries. But yeah, all in all, the Ayaka teams are gonna basically be doing like 50% more damage. But yeah, so I'll talk about her a lot more once I get to recording the pre-release, obviously. And keep in mind, this is the first beta iteration, so there's likely going to be some changes before release. As of now, she's kind of broken, honestly. I wouldn't say best unit in the game broken, but like, I don't want dedicated supports to be this powerful because it creates situations where if you don't have the dedicated support, the archetype is significantly worse. And I think that's just tragic. HP inflation is going to keep happening. Characters like Ayaka more and more struggle to reach the DPS checks. With Escoffier, she'll now be fine, but it means that if you don't have Escoffier, you won't be able to clear your DPS checks with Ayaka, which is sad. I really hope she gets nerfed a little at least. Like, I don't mind her being an upgrade, but I think she's too much of an upgrade right now. Personally, I would like to see this number nerfed. Make it 35, not 55, and I'm happy with that. I think that's gonna be it for this. I hope you learned a thing or two. I really hope this isn't just now what the trend for Genshin character releases is gonna be. See, Lolly was enough, man. We don't need more of this shit. I feel like that one needs some sinos, but oh well. Like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.